10 states making life hardest for Black people in America. Let's be clear, this video isn't about fear, hate, or attacking places. It's about patterns, data, and lived reality that too many people pretend don't exist. If where you live can affect your health, your job options, your kids' schools, and your long-term stability, then pretending everywhere is the same is the real lie. Some of you will agree, some of you won't, and that's the point. Today, let us take a hard, data-driven look at how life actually plays out across the country when you measure income, wealth, employment, health, education, policing, and civil rights outcomes. This isn't about opinions or headlines. It's about patterns that repeat themselves year after year, regardless of personal effort. You'll discover why geography still shapes opportunity, how systems quietly amplify inequality, and why some places consistently produce tougher realities for Black residents, while others don't. The deeper you go into the numbers, the clearer it becomes that these outcomes aren't random. And they're not just history. This video breaks down what the data reveals, why these trends persist, and what everyday life looks like behind the statistics. Some of the findings may challenge assumptions. Others may confirm lived experiences many people already know too well. Watch closely as the countdown unfolds, because the final ranking pulls together every metric discussed and may completely change how you see opportunity in America. If you value honest analysis, real context, and conversations that matter, like the video, subscribe to Mr. Globe TV, and share your thoughts in the comments. Number 10. Arkansas. Arkansas doesn't make life harder through dramatic headlines or constant flashpoints. It does it quietly, through systems that move just slow enough to look normal. For many Black residents, the challenge isn't a single bad break. It's a series of small disadvantages, stacked so neatly they start to look like the floor plan. Poverty rates for Black families here consistently sit near the top nationally, and that reality sets the tone for everything else. When income starts low, wealth building never really gets traction. Wages lag, savings struggle to form, and homeownership, often the main engine of generational wealth, becomes harder to reach or harder to leverage. It's less a ladder and more a treadmill. Lots of effort, very little forward movement. Healthcare adds another layer of pressure. Access is thin in many parts of the state, and outcomes follow predictable lines. Chronic conditions show up earlier, care arrives later, and preventative services are often out of reach. It's the kind of system where problems don't explode, they just linger, quietly draining time, money, and energy. Education tells a similar story. Funding in Arkansas is tightly linked to location, and location is still deeply shaped by race and income. Schools serving Black communities routinely operate with fewer resources, fewer advanced opportunities, and less insulation from economic stress. The message isn't spoken aloud, but it's felt early. Some zip codes get a head start, others get a warning label. Civil rights progress exists here, but it moves cautiously, like it's walking uphill in dress shoes. Change comes slowly, often after resistance, and rarely fast enough to close gaps that have been widening for generations. Arkansas isn't about chaos or cruelty, it's about structure. And when the structure itself leans a certain way, the outcome isn't accidental, it's inevitable. Number 9. South Carolina. South Carolina often gets framed as a place of deep Black history, culture, and influence, and that part is absolutely true. The state has one of the strongest Black population shares in the country, but numbers alone don't translate into power, and they certainly don't guarantee prosperity. In South Carolina, representation and outcomes live in two very different neighborhoods. The wealth gap here remains stubbornly wide. Black residents are present in large numbers across cities and rural areas, yet wealth accumulation lags far behind. Homeownership rates trail, wages stay compressed, and generational assets remain thin. It's the kind of imbalance where participation is high, but payoff is low, like showing up to the game every day and still never getting to call the plays. Tourism makes this contrast even sharper. Coastal cities generate billions through visitors, hotels, and postcard-perfect marketing. But just beyond those polished corridors, many Black communities see little of that money circulate back. Jobs exist, yes, but they're often seasonal, low-wage, and disconnected from long-term wealth building. The glow of prosperity fades quickly once you leave the tourist zones. Healthcare access draws an even harder line. Rural areas face chronic shortages of providers and facilities, and Black residents are disproportionately affected. Longer travel times, fewer specialists, and delayed care aren't abstract policy issues. They shape real outcomes, from chronic disease to life expectancy. Education mirrors the same pattern. School districts vary dramatically by location, with resources clustering in wealthier, often whiter areas. For many Black students, opportunity depends less on ability and more on address, reinforcing gaps before adulthood even begins. Policing reform is frequently discussed, carefully worded, and publicly supported. Yet disparities in stops, arrests, and outcomes continue to show up in the data, suggesting that language has moved faster than reality. South Carolina proves a hard truth. Having a strong Black presence doesn't automatically produce strong Black outcomes. Power requires more than numbers. It requires systems willing to deliver. Number 8. Texas. Texas loves to sell itself as the land of endless opportunity. Big cities, booming industries, cranes on every skyline. It looks like success is being manufactured around the clock. But for many Black residents, access to that prosperity feels more like watching a parade from behind a barricade. The economy is massive, yes, but entry points aren't evenly distributed. Housing is a perfect example. While markets in cities like Houston, Dallas, and Austin have surged, Black homeownership continues to lag behind. Prices rose faster than wages, inventory tightened, and what was once get in early became maybe next decade. Appreciation happened, but often without inclusion. Owning property in a booming market only helps if you can actually buy in. Healthcare adds another pressure point. Coverage options in Texas remain limited, and gaps hit Black communities hardest. Preventive care often gets postponed, routine issues turn chronic, and access depends heavily on employer benefits or geography. In a state known for scale, basic care can still feel oddly out of reach. Criminal justice outcomes shift dramatically depending on where you stand on the map. County lines matter a lot. Policing practices, sentencing trends, and incarceration rates can look entirely different just an hour down the highway. Consistency isn't Texas's strong suit here, and disparity thrives in the gaps. Then there's the political climate. Growth is king, development moves fast, incentives flow freely, and business expansion gets red carpet treatment. Equity, however, is often treated like a side conversation, acknowledged, discussed, and postponed. The result is progress that accelerates some communities while others are told to hang tight. Texas isn't hostile by default, it's ambitious. But ambition without guardrails tends to reward those already positioned to benefit. For Black Texans, the promise is real, but delivery depends heavily on zip code, timing, and luck. In a state this big, uneven outcomes don't look accidental. They look built into the blueprint. Number 7. Georgia. Georgia often gets celebrated as a Black success story, and in some places that reputation is earned. Atlanta stands tall as a global hub of Black culture, business, education, and influence. But step outside the metro glow, and the picture changes quickly. For many Black Georgians, prosperity feels less like a statewide reality and more like a city-specific perk. Income gaps widen the farther you move from urban centers. Rural Black communities face fewer job options, lower wages, and limited economic mobility. The opportunities that exist in Atlanta don't travel well. They stay clustered, gated by geography and access, leaving large parts of the state running on a very different economic clock. Education follows the same pattern. Metro area schools often benefit from stronger funding, better facilities, and broader course offerings. Once you leave those districts, resources thin out fast. Class sizes grow, extracurriculars disappear, and college pathways narrow. Talent is evenly distributed. Opportunity is not. In Georgia, your zip code often determines how far your potential can realistically stretch. Gentrification adds another twist. Neighborhoods that once anchored Black communities are now prime real estate, and long-standing residents find themselves priced out of places they helped build. Rising property values look great on paper, unless you're the one being pushed out by higher taxes, rent hikes, and revitalization that doesn't include you. Healthcare access also mirrors this split reality. Urban areas offer more options, while rural regions face shortages that disproportionately affect Black residents. Preventive care becomes reactive care, and outcomes follow predictable lines. Georgia proves that progress can coexist with pressure. Opportunity exists, but it's selective. It shows up in specific corridors, certain counties, and carefully drawn boundaries. For those inside, the state can feel full of promise. For those outside, it feels like watching success happen through a window you're not allowed to open. In Georgia, the headlines celebrate the wins. The quieter struggle lives just beyond the city limits, and it rarely makes the brochure. Number 6. New Jersey. New Jersey is one of the wealthiest states in America. On paper, it looks like opportunity wrapped in convenience: strong schools, high incomes, major job markets, and proximity to New York and Philadelphia. But for many Black residents, that wealth feels like a neighbor who never invites you over. Despite all that money flowing through the state, racial disparities remain extreme. Income and wealth gaps are wide, persistent, and stubbornly resistant to change. Black families often earn less, own less, and have fewer pathways to build generational stability, even while living right next door to some of the richest zip codes in the country. The criminal justice numbers are even harder to ignore. New Jersey consistently ranks among states with the highest black-to-white incarceration ratios. This isn't about crime spikes, it's about how systems apply pressure differently, depending on who you are and where you live. The result is long-term disruption to families, finances, and futures. Housing plays a major role here. Costs are high across the board, but the burden lands heavier on Black residents. Sky-high prices and property taxes make homeownership difficult to enter and even harder to sustain. When housing blocks access, wealth building stalls before it can start. Education adds another layer of irony. New Jersey boasts some of the best school systems in the nation, but access is uneven. The quality of education often depends on district boundaries tied to housing prices. Excellent schools exist, but many Black families are priced out of the neighborhoods that feed into them. Proximity to opportunity doesn't guarantee entry. Jobs, networks, and resources may be close, but barriers remain firmly in place. New Jersey proves a quiet truth: wealth nearby doesn't automatically lift everyone. Sometimes it just makes the gaps more visible. We're officially halfway through the countdown, so please take a second to like the video, subscribe to Mr. Globe TV, and stay with us because the second half only gets heavier. Number 5. Minnesota. Minnesota has a reputation problem, mainly because the reputation is glowing. Year after year, it shows up on best state lists for quality of life, education, healthcare, and economic stability. And for many residents, that praise is earned. But for Black Minnesotans, the experience often reads like a different report entirely, filed in much smaller print. The income gap tells the story fast. Minnesota consistently ranks among the states with the largest Black-white income disparities in the country. That gap doesn't shrink during good economic times, it often widens. Even when the broader economy is strong, Black workers are more likely to be unemployed, underpaid, or locked out of higher-paying sectors. Prosperity here has a habit of stopping short of certain communities. Employment disparities persist with impressive consistency. Strong job markets don't automatically translate into fair access. Credentials don't close the gap. Experience doesn't either. The result is a labor market where effort is required from everyone, but payoff is unevenly distributed. Policing outcomes add another layer of tension. Disparities in stops, use of force, and criminal justice outcomes remain stark, and they haven't faded with time or promises of reform. For many Black residents, interactions with law enforcement feel less like protection and more like probability. What makes Minnesota especially frustrating is the contrast. The state speaks fluent progress, diversity statements are polished, equity language is everywhere, but branding hasn't translated into outcomes. The systems look modern, well-funded, and efficient, right up until you measure who they actually work for. Minnesota isn't struggling because it lacks resources. It struggles because those resources don't flow evenly. When a place ranks best overall while leaving clear gaps untouched, it creates a special kind of whiplash, one where expectations are high and disappointment hits harder. On paper, Minnesota shines. In practice, many Black residents are still waiting for the numbers to catch up to the messaging. Number 4. Michigan. Michigan's story is often told through grit and recovery. The factories closed, the cities struggled, and then, depending on who you ask, things got better. But for many Black residents, that comeback feels more like a press release than a lived reality. The economic shock of deindustrialization didn't hit evenly, and the recovery didn't either. Black unemployment in Michigan has consistently outpaced white unemployment, even during periods of economic growth. When jobs returned, they didn't always return to the same neighborhoods or to the same people. Manufacturing once offered stable wages and a clear path to the middle class. When those jobs vanished, Black communities were left with fewer alternatives and thinner margins. Housing was supposed to be the stabilizer. Instead, the housing crises hit like a second wave. Homeownership rates among Black families collapsed as foreclosures swept through cities like Detroit and Flint. Generational wealth disappeared almost overnight, and rebuilding has proven far harder than losing it ever was. Health outcomes tell the downstream story. Post-industrial cities struggle with underfunded healthcare systems, environmental stressors, and higher rates of chronic illness. Black residents feel these effects more intensely, not because of personal choices, but because access and prevention were never evenly distributed to begin with. What makes Michigan especially difficult is the uneven nature of recovery. Downtowns show signs of life, new businesses move in, headlines talk about revitalization, but many Black neighborhoods remain stuck between past collapse and future promises. Investment arrives selectively, often skipping the communities that absorbed the deepest losses. Michigan isn't lacking effort. People worked hard here for decades. What disappeared was the structure that made that work pay off. When the factories left, they took stability with them, and the safety net that followed was never strong enough to catch everyone. The state's challenge isn't remembering how to rebuild. It's deciding who gets included when it does. Number 3. Illinois. Illinois often looks prosperous from a distance. Chicago anchors the state with global finance, corporate headquarters, world-class universities, and constant development. But that success has a talent for masking what's happening beyond a few polished corridors. For many Black residents, Illinois doesn't feel like one economy. It feels like two running side by side, rarely intersecting. The income gap makes that split impossible to ignore. Illinois consistently ranks among the states with the largest Black-white income disparities. High-paying jobs exist in abundance, yet access remains uneven. For Black households, wages lag while costs climb, creating a situation where growth happens nearby but rarely trickles down. Education funding follows the same fault lines. Schools are largely supported by local property taxes, which means wealthier, often whiter areas enjoy better-funded classrooms, newer facilities, and broader opportunities. Meanwhile, schools serving Black communities operate with fewer resources, larger class sizes, and limited academic pathways. The system doesn't fail randomly. It performs exactly as designed. Housing segregation keeps the cycle intact. Decades of redlining and zoning patterns still shape where people live, what they can afford, and which schools their children attend. Even as neighborhoods redevelop, long-standing Black residents are often pushed out rather than lifted up. Appreciation happens, but ownership doesn't always follow. Criminal justice outcomes add another layer of imbalance. Arrest rates, sentencing patterns, and incarceration figures remain heavily race-skewed, particularly in urban areas. The consequences extend far beyond courtrooms, affecting employment, housing access, and family stability for years. What makes Illinois especially difficult is the contrast. Prosperity is visible, celebrated, and constantly advertised. Yet large segments of the Black population remain locked out of that success, watching it unfold from a distance. Illinois isn't short on money, talent, or opportunity. The challenge is distribution. When two economies share one state and only one consistently benefits, the result isn't confusion. It's inequality with a skyline. Number 2. Louisiana. Louisiana has culture in abundance: music, food, history, resilience. What it struggles with is delivery. For many Black residents, the challenge isn't one broken system. It's what happens when several systems fail simultaneously and then politely pretend not to notice each other. Health outcomes are a clear starting point. Louisiana regularly posts some of the lowest life expectancy figures in the country, and Black residents bear the brunt of it. Chronic illness shows up earlier, preventative care arrives later, and access depends heavily on location and income. Healthcare here doesn't collapse dramatically, it erodes quietly, visit by missed visit. The justice system compounds the damage. Louisiana has long ranked among the states with the highest incarceration rates, and black families are disproportionately affected. This isn't just about time served, it's about income lost, families disrupted, and futures permanently narrowed. When incarceration becomes common, instability becomes normalized. Economically, low wages meet limited upward mobility head-on. Jobs exist, but they often don't pay enough to build momentum. Raises are modest, advancement is slow, and wealth-building opportunities remain scarce. It's the kind of economy where working hard keeps the lights on, but rarely turns them brighter. Environmental risk adds another layer most people don't factor in. Industrial corridors, flood-prone areas, and pollution-heavy zones are disproportionately located near black neighborhoods. Health problems aren't just medical here, they're geographic. Where you live quietly determines what you're exposed to. And then there's policy. Political solutions tend to lag well behind the scale of the problems. Reforms are discussed, commissions are formed, and studies are cited, while outcomes barely budge. Change moves slower than the damage does. Louisiana isn't short on effort. People work, adapt, and endure. What's missing is coordination. When healthcare, justice, wages, environment, and policy all pull in the wrong direction at the same time, survival becomes the baseline, not success. In Louisiana, inequality isn't hidden, it's layered, and when every system fails at once, the struggle stops being personal and starts being structural. Number 1. Mississippi. Mississippi doesn't make the list because of one bad metric or a temporary downturn. It makes the list because the same outcomes repeat themselves decade after decade, almost on schedule. For many black residents, hardship here isn't a surprise, it's the default setting. Poverty rates for black Mississippians consistently rank among the highest in the nation. That reality shapes everything that follows. When income starts low and stays low, wealth never has a chance to form. Savings remain thin, emergencies hit harder, and homeownership, often the gateway to generational stability, becomes difficult to achieve and even harder to protect. The wealth and income gaps are deep, wide, and stubborn. Mississippi's economy doesn't just produce inequality, it preserves it. Economic growth, when it appears, tends to flow upward and outward, rarely settling long enough in black communities to change long-term outcomes. Hard work exists in abundance. Reward does not. Healthcare access adds another layer of strain. Many communities face provider shortages, hospital closures, and limited preventative care. Outcomes reflect that reality. Higher rates of chronic illness, lower life expectancy, and delayed treatment that turns manageable issues into lifelong burdens. Health here isn't just about biology, it's about access, distance, and cost. Education tells a similar story. Funding is closely tied to local property values, and those values are still shaped by race and history. Schools serving black students often operate with fewer resources, fewer advanced programs, and fewer safety nets. Talent shows up everywhere, but opportunity remains geographically selective. Civil rights progress exists, but it moves carefully, slowly, and often under pressure. Structural change meets resistance that's polite on the surface and firm underneath. Improvements arrive, but rarely at the speed needed to close gaps that have been widening for generations. Mississippi isn't struggling by accident. The systems here work exactly as they were built to work. And when structures remain untouched, outcomes remain predictable. For black residents, the challenge isn't figuring out what's wrong. It's living every day inside a framework that makes forward motion harder than it ever needs to be. And that brings us to the end of this countdown. If there's one takeaway from this list, it's this. The struggle isn't random, and it isn't evenly distributed. Across these states, the patterns repeat themselves. Wide income and wealth gaps, uneven access to healthcare and education, housing barriers, justice disparities, and policies that move far slower than the problems they're meant to solve. Different places, different histories, but remarkably similar outcomes. This wasn't about pointing fingers or labeling entire states as bad. It was about looking honestly at how systems perform when you measure results instead of intentions. For millions of black Americans, daily life is shaped less by effort alone and more by geography, structure, and access. Where you live still matters, sometimes more than it should. If you saw your state on this list, or if your experience tells a similar story, your perspective matters. These conversations don't move forward without real voices and lived reality. Thank you for watching all the way through. If this video gave you clarity, context, or even just language for things you've felt but couldn't quite explain, hit the like button, subscribe Mr. Globe TV, and share this video with someone who needs to see it. And most importantly, drop a comment. Agree, disagree, add nuance. That's how the conversation grows. Until next time, stay curious and keep looking beyond the headlines.